By May 7th, the last of the tickets for the voyage were sold. Many of the passengers, too frightened to remain in their home or in hiding, had made the trip to Hamburg well in advance of sailing. Many found the delay bearable. They were nearer their destination, and somehow safer. A few of the passengers, those who had managed to retain some wealth, came to Hamburg by plane. They were so sure of their position that they did not mind rubbing shoulders with Nazi officers. But most traveled third class on trains, terrified that they would be recognized. Leo Jockel had buried his face in a newspaper ever since leaving Berlin. He spoke to no one, but from time to time glanced up at other passengers on the train, wondering if they too were heading for the Saint. Louis. Once, after a Gestapo officer passed, he went to the washroom and examined his face in the mirror. The tiredness showed in his eyes. They had an expression of almost perpetual sadness, as if he were close to tears. But Jockel was concerned about one disturbing feature. His nose was slightly large. He had come to fear it was enough to give away the fact that he was half Jewish. For 6 difficult years, he had successfully concealed the knowledge from all but a few trusted friends. Until 1933, Jockel had been only vaguely aware of the anti-Semitism in the Vienna of his childhood. Even later, he was cosseted by living in a predominantly Protestant area. Before the Anschluss of 1938, when 45,000 Jews were forced to leave Austria within 8 months and suicides rose to 200 a day, Leo Jockel, then 24, had slipped into Germany and assumed a new background. Since then, he had lived in terror of discovery. He stayed in the train's washroom as long as he dared. When he returned to his seat as the train neared Hamburg, he, like the other Jews on the train, believed everyone was looking at him. Leo Jockel was the captain's steward on the ship, and that night of May 7th, when he boarded the Saint. Louis, returning from shore leave, Schindig sought him out. Schindig had chosen Leo deliberately as a means of revenge against the captain, not only because Jockel was in a position to observe the captain closely, but because it gave him keen pleasure to pit the steward against the captain. He was jealous of Jockel's good manners, his general popularity on board, and his coveted place in the captain's life. If Schindig had suspected how close the relationship between Jockel and Schroeder really was, he would likely have made sure the senior steward was dispatched to a concentration camp. If he had known he was half a Jew, Jockel would have been in grave danger. So would the captain, for knowingly concealing a person of Jewish blood was enough to destroy Gustav Schroeder. The captain had inherited Jockel when he assumed command of the Saint, Louis, and he liked him immediately. Over many voyages they had come to know each other better, and a mutual affection, something not unlike the relationship between a stern but just father and a happy-go-lucky son, had developed. The natural barrier of rank and background which kept them apart ashore did not matter in the privacy of the captain's day cabin. But men realized that such a close relationship must remain unknown to the rest of the crew. It could only give rise to speculation and jealousy. Jockel had confided that he was half Jewish. Schroeder had listened attentively and given a firm promise that his steward's secret was safe with him. The matter was never referred to again. Now, as Jockel listened to Schindig's demands that he should spy on the captain, he felt almost ill. For a moment he considered striking out at Schindig, but assaulting the party lighter was bound to be a punishable crime. It would achieve nothing except to bring unwelcome attention. Instead, he nodded. His instinct told him that apparent agreement was the safest strategy for himself and Captain Schroeder. Later, alone in his cabin, he decided that, if necessary, he would feed Schindig trivia, even lies. Jockel failed to take into account the fact that Schindig could confirm his reports through other spies, and that he would then be in greater danger than before. Aaron Posner had made a discovery which filled him with anxiety. Since crawling into his hiding place, he had followed a routine. Each day he slept among the animal hides, fitfully, in the middle of the busy and noisy harbor. Each night and into the early morning. When the waterfront was mostly quiet and the pier deserted except for its guards, he crept out of his hiding place to scavenge for food. There was always the odd crate of fruit from which a banana or orange could be prized. One night he had even found a half-full bottle of milk left over from a workman's lunch. After his diet at Dachau of bread and water, With only rainwater for washing, these were treasures. On the night of Sunday, May 7th, he noticed the warships in the harbor were lit up very late. He could hear the sound of voices coming from them. Peering through the hides, he saw civilians, women, walking the decks with young officers. Sunday, he thought, must be the time for cocktail parties, for showing off the newfound strength of the German Navy. He could see at least a dozen such warships, each with its swastika flying at the stern. There was also a passenger ship. He crawled out of his hole, crossed behind a building, and read its name. It was the St. Louis. He then made the discovery that sent him scurrying back to his hiding place. The St. Louis, like the warships in Hamburg harbor, and like the Gestapo guards' towers ringing Dachau, was flying the Nazi swastika. The swastika symbolized the party's control over the St. Louis. He understood by instinct what the captain disbelieved, that the ship was a pawn of the Nazis. The German Minister of Propaganda, Joseph Goebbels, had, a month before, laid the foundations for a part of his plan for the St. Louis. He authorized 14 Nazi propaganda agents to infiltrate Cuba, and within the month they had succeeded in stirring up anti-Semitism on the island. They arranged that an intensive inflammatory campaign be waged on the radio and in 3 Havana newspapers, directed against German refugees and Jews long established in Cuba. Cuban President Federico Bru could not ignore the growing anti-Semitism. It was just what Goebbels wanted. The Munich Agreement of September 29, 1938, had provided, for more fortunate Jews, a delay of war and time to get out of Germany. But since 1939, the repression of the Nazis, the restrictions imposed by countries of refuge, and the success of Goebbels' propaganda machine had dammed the flow. Goebbels had told his followers, the poorer and therefore the more burdensome the immigrant to the country absorbing them, the stronger that country will react, and the more favorable will be the effect in the interests of German propaganda. He was therefore pleased at the effect of the anti-Semitic campaign in Cuba. From the moment the St. Louis passengers boarded, Goebbels intended his ministry to capitalize on the ship's journey. Passengers like Posner shabby, dirty, undesirable, would be much more than anonymous refugees. Goebbels would ensure that they, and the St. Louis, appeared as an example to the entire world of the Jewish situation in microcosm.